Good evening. As you can see, we made some progress on this in the 1909 16-inch Hendey. It's getting a little more clean, a little more gray. Of course, the big thing though is the saddle's back together. So, can't really see the most important parts that much here, but you see a little bit of the cross sideways there. They're not perfect. I admit that there's a couple little scratches on them from scraping, but it's getting good coverage, good contact, about 20 points per inch. So I'm happy with it. Same thing with these wings here. Got those scraped. I intentionally went for kind of a big and broad scraping marks because I want it to be more cosmetic than load bearing. And these surfaces I don't think were scraped to begin with. I just opted to do that to help kind of correct the imperfections left when they were resurfaced. So they are visually a lot better now, and with the exception of a couple spots that are still a bit low, that they're all coplanar. So if I set something here and I then move it over here, it's going to be in the same height. The other thing I did is got the apron back together with I was able to find an extra apron from another. It's a single wall apron from a similar vintage Hendey for the same size of machine. And with that, between the two of them, I was able to make one half decent one. Still kind of getting it fitted together though. Because a lot of these parts are kind of built in batches, so it's some of the parts have been replaced are a little tight, and other ones are still kind of sloppy, but it's better than it was. So I'm going to turn this thing on here in a second, but you can see it's been doing some cutting. It's pretty much back up and running. One of the next big projects I want to do is get this apron control to be functional, and I'm still kind of working out how I'm going to make that happen. What I'd like to do is have it so it's of course stopped when it's in the off, and it would speed up because we have a VFD controlling the motor back there, and so the more you go towards forward, the faster the motor would go, and go back to off and speed up and reverse as well. And the way I hope to make that happen is I have this little cylinder here I'm going to hang below the apron, and it's got this sprocket drive that connects it to the rod that this goes to. And inside there I'm going to be set up with a center tapped potentiometer, where it's, instead of starting low and going high, it goes low and then to high, low to high. And between that and a couple of micro switches or limit switches, I want to get it set up so that this motion that I'm aiming for here is translating to those switches there, which then can be wired into the VFD back here. And I don't think I had this cabinet on here with the last video either. This cabinet I had salvaged from a lathe that unfortunately went to the scrapyard. But it's got new life now, holding the VFD and other components. It's a little messy in there, so I don't get too deep into it. Like I said, I'm still getting this thing kind of patched up. Until the apron control comes together, I have some switches temporarily wired here for forward reverse, mainly for testing. I don't want to use the machine like this, kind of rough. But anyway, I've just been going through, and while making all these repairs, kind of getting as much of that gnarly old green paint off as I can, and getting a good decent coat of gray over everything, and just kind of making all these little minor repairs as I go. You see I still have the compound to do. I want to take that apart and get it scraped in, make a few repairs to that. The taper attachment, I haven't had a chance to try it out yet, but it's all there. I don't see anything else that needs to be done to it other than putting it to work. I'm also working on getting a coolant pump set up. I had it set up with a kind of a remote pump underneath sitting on the floor there, and I've decided instead to try to go something a little closer to how it was, because when these lathes came out of the factory, they would have had a pump here and like a little half tray on top of the pan here, and then for whether it was a cone head or gear head, these lathes that were belted up to the ceiling, they would have another belt coming down to that pump. Or being as this one has, you know, a factory, or had a factory motor, I'm going to set up a bracket here that'll hang off the back of this way that'll hold the motor, which you can see right down there, above this pump. And so then that'll run the coolant. You can see I also was able to get this cover replaced. It's still getting fitted in as well, just kind of batch and generational differences, but it was from a same 16-inch Hendey of similar vintage as this one. So the other thing, which you'll see in the motor here, or excuse me, in the video here in a second, is that I'm getting some racket out of this front shaft across here, and I'm inclined to blame some of it on this belt. I think it's putting a little too much pressure on this shaft and kind of putting a little bit of flex in it. Some of it is at this collar over here. You can see where it's worn. That pin, it's in there. It's not all the way, but there's some wear between this collar and this bushing that I need to get fixed. And I believe some of it, because when I got this lathe, they had it running on V belts. And I think it was a similar thing. Is that these belts are just putting too much tension on this shaft and causing, it's probably got a bit of wear in these bearings. You can see where there's some leaking out from there, although some of that's going to be expected. But you'll see when it's running, these shafts are kind of moving around while it's running. You can hear some kind of grumbling going on here, and anyway, need to address that. In the meantime, I'm just keeping lots of oil in it and just trying to watch it and see if I can figure out exactly where the problem is. But solution for the belt, I like this big flat belt design. It's cool and fits the machine. But the more and more documents and survivor lathes that are out there I've seen, the more I think that this lathe probably didn't have flat belt new. It was probably had a silent chain drive. With that, I would not have to have as large of a pulley up here. I could still have the same ratio, but smaller sprocket here, and that would really help in clearance issues right here. So I've got a belt guard I was putting together for this, which I still might make use of, but with that guard, it's really close to the bore there. And the other thing is that with this belt, in order to transport the full power of that motor, it has to have this width. But that makes it to where Collet closer, which I have for the lathe, I'll show you that in a second, has to have some spacers to get it. Instead of being the hand wheel for the closer being right here, I have to have the wheel out here. So going instead to a silent chain drive, this 5-horse motor needs approximately 4 to 5 inches of belt to really get that power across. Silent chain drive would only need a 1-inch wide chain to run. So that would really help that. Now, as I noted with the collets, is that this lathe new shipped with a set of collets from the factory. Unfortunately, it was all missing by the time I got it, but I've been piecing it back together. You see I got 2 here. I found 2 of these cabinets that were just the cabinet, that didn't have any of the rest of the hardware to go with it. So as I've been completing the one that's going to go on my machine, I'm completing this other one as well, and I've got another home lined up for it. But see if I open this without dropping anything here. But you can see we got collets, we got collet nose, we got a collet closer. And there was a little bit of woodwork that went into getting these things put together as well. But I'm going to open this up. I'm not entirely certain what kind of wood this is. I'm not much of a woodworker, but I think it's possibly mahogany. But the other, looking at some of the prints, Hendey had used birch for some of the stuff too, and so I found some birch, and I was able to replace a couple of these pieces. This ring was missing on both cabinets, as well as, open this up, you can see. Sorry, I'm doing this one-handed. That little hex spacer and the little ring inside of it was missing as well. So those I made out of birch and put a little stain on them. They look like they pretty well as part of the cabinet. So that part's ready to go. But this cabinet was meant to hang off of the machine. And so I've seen them done a couple ways. Some, I think, of the oldest ones had a clamp that clamped it onto the edge of the pan down there. And the most common ones I've seen were they had a clamp that went off the ways, which is how I want to do these. That's the last piece of the puzzle on these Collet boxes, is getting a bed clamp put together, which I have some CAD drawings modeled up after the factory drawings that I'm going to see if I can use those to produce a pattern and produce some castings for these clamps. We'll see. It's going to be a lot of work for just having a genuine cast iron clamp, but once those clamps are done. Oh, and real quick, this right here was all reproduced. So this flange, this tube, was all stuff that was made to the print with some artistic liberty for the sake of making these out of materials I had or could get, as opposed to maybe the materials they had when they first made it. Like, for example, I think this flange was cast before, and I made it out of a weldment of a bushing and a plate. But I think it turned out okay. These cabinets, they're actually, I think, a little bit new for this lathe. I think they started patenting these in the 1920s. So, 10, 15 years later, I think they'll fit in with the machine, though. But, and probably going to end up having that cabinet hung off the lathe probably right about here, just so it doesn't take up too much room on the end of the bed over there. It's just the 6 o'clock alarm. All right, so those are most all the updates. So if we turn this thing on, we'll see how it's cutting. Not the best finish, but play with my cutter geometry and speeds and feeds, I'm sure it can get better. Of course, this is a slow lathe, so I'm not going to get high speed finishes out of it, but it'll be good for what it does. You can hear some of that grumbling going on over here. Something between this shaft and this selector is just not happy. But like I said, I think getting this to where it doesn't require a fully tensioned belt, because a silent chain does not need near as much tension as a flat belt or V-belt, I think that'll be the biggest help. As well as getting this bushing over here repaired, and I may need to crack the head open on this one more time to see if maybe there's a bent shaft in there, or gear needs a bushing or something. Gotta open it up, gotta open it up. So for 113 years old, I think this fine, cutting-edge piece of machinery is doing okay. It just needs a little more work. At least now it's making chips again.